Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. To start off with this week, we have a very interesting topic, and that's a very interesting latest development also. Yes, we did hear about this Quad concept, where the Japanese, the Australians, the Americans, and the Indians, they were planning to form an alliance, a military alliance perhaps, to counter China, and especially in the South China Sea. Now, there is a very interesting phenomena that is more about the Indo-Pacific region. Recently, we heard that the United States of America, along with Great Britain and Australia, they have come up with an idea that the Americans will provide the technology to the British to develop nuclear submarines. And let me clear you one thing here, that these are not the nuclear submarines which will be having the nuclear weapons, but they won't be operating on regular diesel or electricity. Rather, they'll be on the nuclear fuel. That gives them a lot of edge. They can stay submerged for a very long time. They would only pop up whenever perhaps food is required. But you know, if you have a good amount of food stored, you can just vanish for months and months. The Australians will pay for it, but it's a very interesting equation. What is the difference between Quad and AUKUS? How will it move forward? What sort of an effect it is going to have globally, and especially in that particular region? Our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that, and after that I'll introduce you to our panelists and we'll talk about it.
The historic security pact signed between the United States, Britain and Australia by thwarting France by the multi-billion-dollar deal signed in 2016 with Australia has started a new strategic war between the power contenders. This security pact is proof that the United States still is on an obsessive pathway of unilateralism and cannot cater of any competition towards its hegemony in the international arena. This pact is a joint effort to equip Australia with a fleet of advanced nuclear-powered submarines in Indo-Pacific. This pact is evidence that the US-led new Cold War is aggressively progressing and putting the whole world at the threat of the nuclear arm race and maneuvers. AUKUS Pact was announced in a joint virtual press conference between United States President Joe Biden, United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. Though China was not mentioned explicitly, all the three leaders referred repeatedly that this pact was integral for catering to regional security concerns, which had grown significantly. The French foreign minister described this agreement as a stab in the back and unacceptable behavior. However, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that the pact was in the country's national and strategic interests. It is an obvious fact that the US is apprehensive regarding China and Russia's growing influence, specifically in South Asia, after its face-saving exit from Afghanistan. This new pact regarding securitizing the Indian Ocean is proof that the United States' core ally India is losing its grip on the strategic importance which was given by the US to counter China in the respective national security policy.
Now, to talk about this very important issue, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. In our studio, we have with us Dr. Tughral Yamin Sahab, Senior Analyst, Expert on International Relations. So thank you so much for your time. And we have been also joined in by Skype from Germany, Helga Zepp Larouche. She is the founder, Chairwoman, Schiller Institute. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time and talking to PTV World. And from Italy, we have Excellency Ambassador Jauhar Saleem Sahab, who is in Italy as an ambassador of Pakistan. Thank you so much, Jauhar Saleem Sahab, for your time as well, sir. It's a pleasure to have both of you in the studio. But let me start off from you, Tughral Yamin Sahab. I've been glued to the television ever since this AUKUS has been announced, sir, just to know that what would be those 8 submarines look like. The Austrians, they will pay for it. The technology is going to be transferred from the Americans to the British, and the British will manufacture. Now, this gives definitely, if there is a problem in France, it's a very legitimate, because they have mastered the art of developing and making submarines. They were not given the contract. And interestingly, forget France about it, but even the Indians are not there, though they are the members of Quad. And on top, Japanese, they have been kept aside as well. Seems like a Western alliance of the white men Is that a correct statement, sir?
Faisal Rahman Sahab, are you aware of the term 5 eyes?
Yes, sir.
So these are the 2 eyes. The 5 eyes are the 5 English-speaking
Yes.
countries, and they have a very intimate intelligence relationship, and they don't make any bones about
That
it.
includes
they don't hide
New
it.
Zealand, Australia, England, Canada, and US.
Yes, sir.
Correct, sir?
And they don't hide it. If you read the book of Mr. Hayden, General Hayden, who was the director of National Intelligence Agency, in his book, Playing to the Edge, pages 33 to 35, he very clearly states that this is the inner core of all intelligence sharing. So these are the 2 principal countries. They are cousins. The British consider themselves to be perhaps lesser cousins to the Americans, but they speak the same language. Okay, so these are the 5 English-speaking countries, and they have grouped together. So this is very much Anglo-Saxon preserve, or white men's preserve, or women's preserve, whatever way you. So they feel comfortable with each other. The Brits.
And it's a natural alliance also.
Perhaps this is a natural alliance. You feel comfortable with people who speak Punjabi or Urdu or something when you're
Absolutely,
perfectly at ease. So they speak the same language. They perhaps they drawl their words. The Brits speak in a stiff upper lip, but they all speak English. Their mindsets are same. Their DNA is same. So they don't have to talk to Japanese, which is a different language, different doctrines. They don't have to talk to Indians, Mr. Modi, who has got a different mindset. So they are very much at ease with each other. And then you see the Australians will now be the 7th country operating nuclear-powered subs. The Indians are already operating them. They have the technology from the Russians. They had the Russian nuclear subs, which were
What about NPT then, sir?
There's nothing to do with the NPT here. It's a nuclear-powered sub. You have a nuclear power plant, a power plant big enough to light up a medium-sized city. That's how big a nuclear submarine's power plant is. So nuclear subs are not actually delivering nuclear weapons. They can be
They can be at some stage,
They can
yes.
be configured.
If there is a provision,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. But the important thing about nuclear subs, as you very rightly pointed out, is the unlimited endurance that they have. They don't have to make a port of call. They can remain submerged.
The amount of distance they can cover.
Absolutely.
And they can remain submerged as long as
and
they want.
can fire remaining submerged. They don't have to come up. Diesel subs have to come up because they have to breathe oxygen for the engines as well. They don't have to come up to breathe oxygen. The nuclear
So the
power
case
plant,
is with the electric.
yes, but the nuclear-powered submarine has unlimited endurance. They can circumnavigate the entire world.
So they can be there for 30 years, just imagine.
Absolutely. And they can fire from long distances, so it's a big deterrence. The Brits also have these Polaris submarines. They don't have aircraft configured to deliver nuclear weapons. They have their submarine force, submarine fleet. So it is exactly, and the Americans actually supplied them with the technology to the Brits to make their submarines. So France is hopping mad. I can understand that. They were close to inking a deal.
Were the French ditched? Let me put it this way.
The Americans never trusted the French. You see, the Americans never gave them nuclear technology. They considered it appropriate to give nuclear technology to the Brits, but not to the French. And French, at one point of time, actually left the NATO. They developed their own nuclear technology. Their nuclear deterrence is called the force de frappe. And this has, they say that it's indigenous. You did not provide us with the nuclear technology. You see, the Americans were fortunate. They had these Jews who were migrating to United States of America because they were fleeing the Nazi oppression, and they helped them build the nuclear deterrence. And after the Second World War, it was a race between the Americans and the Soviets to grab hold
Of all the scientists.
Of all the nuclear scientists who were left there.
Yeah.
And they were able to take nuclear scientists, missile scientists from Berlin University
Those
of
who were in
Technology.
the process of making V2 rockets.
They had made the
Yeah.
V2 rockets. So
Yeah.
they had the rocket science.
Even then?
Even then, they were the inventors of rocket science, and the Americans might say, no, Goddard was the one who made the first rockets, but the Germans were very advanced. Germans are really, really brainy people. Small nation, but really brilliant and brainy people. And all their Jews were into the strategic community. They ran away. Americans got a head start on the Russians. but they did not provide any technology to either to the Russians or to the Russia. Obviously, Soviet Union obviously was a competitor, but France, which was an ally, they did not provide them with any nuclear technology. To the Brits,
So
they
had
did
to
provide.
develop on their own, yeah.
So there's a long history behind it. So they had no qualms about ditching the French and the.
So interesting time ahead. Now, but to me, Dr. Tughral, it seems that now the war or the concept of a war is not going to be regarding the borders between countries. It seems as if they shifted towards these civilizations, and a lot of people have written about it, but perhaps it was never considered so appropriate. I mean, people would say, yes, this can happen, but when will it happen? Nobody said anything about it. Let me take the same point to our guest, Ms. Helga, who's joined us from Germany. Helga, a couple of very important points. Let me frame a scenario for you. Let me frame a scenario where I'm talking about the clash of civilizations now. You talk about the Western world, Canada, the Western Europe, you talk about America and Australia, perhaps New Zealand with them. You talk about the Muslims, starting from Morocco all the way to Indonesia and in between. You talk about the Soviets, you talk about the Japanese, you talk about the Sinos, the Chinese, you talk about those who believe in Buddhism, Mongolia all the way down, Korea and certain other countries. Then you talk about Africa. You talk about, rather the southern part of Africa, Latin America. There are different civilizations now. But this particular alliance, which we have recently witnessed, it seems that this is going to be a white man's alliance, the English-speaking alliance. And when you talk about Quad, which we all thought could be very similar, but remember, Japanese are out of this particular, which we call this AUKUS. Indians have been kept out, and it seems that there is very different equation. Do you think this is the beginning of the clash of the civilization, ma'am?
Well, first of all, I think Samuel Huntington knew very little about all the civilizations he talked with. I read his awful books, and I came to the conclusion that he doesn't really know any one of those. I think this is not the spirit of the time. I think this new move by these three Anglo-speaking countries, US, British, and Australia, I think this is very short-sighted and very divisive. I don't know what the long-term effect of this will be to NATO. I mean, this causes very hurt feeling and rage in France, and I do not exclude that they will have a similar impulse like de Gaulle had in 1958. This will have a big impact even in Germany, which used to be very close, to the US and so forth. But this has destroyed the trust. Remember, this is after President Biden just recently promised to pull out of Afghanistan without informing the allies. But he said this is the end of an era, the end of endless wars. And many analysts at that point were wondering, is this meant seriously? Does he really want to end these horrible wars which have caused millions of people's deaths, 70 million refugees? It cost $8 trillion minimum. Does he really mean it serious, or is it just an effort to concentrate forces of the big one, which is the confrontation with Russia, but especially with China? So I think, this is also not going to be good for President Biden, because people now say you can't trust him. If the allies cannot trust the United States, they will think about minding their own business. And I think there is another dynamic in the world, which is completely different. It's not based on military alliances. It's based on economic cooperation. So eco-politics has, in one sense, replaced for many countries of this world geopolitics. And I think it's a much more winning proposition. I think with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road, which was promoted by the Schiller Institute since 1991, by the way, there is another dynamic, and it will be much more attractive, including, I'm sure, to some of the countries in the Indo-Pacific, because the question for them is, do you want to be an aircraft carrier for this new military alliance, or you want to have development of your own infrastructure, your own economy, future for your own people. So I don't think that this old concept of Samuel Huntington is applicable for the present situation, because we are really looking at two systems. One is the decaying system, neoliberal system, which is refusing to respond positively to the offers coming from China and Russia, and I think they are not doing themselves a favor by doing that. I don't think that France and Germany want to be pulled into an alliance against China. They have too much economic
Yes,
interest
correct.
to do that.
All right, Muna, coming to you, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem Saab. Now, let me relate another question to it. As ma'am said that, against China, the French and the Germans, and I would say a lot of Europeans also would not like to become an adversary because of economic reasons and so much more. But now, sir, when we talk about NATO, I still remember when Donald Trump took charge, he was, he took a lot of decisions, I mean, regarding the NAFTA, the NATO, Russians, Chinese, Mexico building the wall, God knows what and what not. But one thing which is very important, sir, and I would like you to throw light on that, is that he also asked the NATO members to pool in 2.5% of their GDP in the NATO, in the bank of NATO, let's put it this way, so that they can pool in and then have the weapons. But unfortunately, NATO is always fighting the war of the Americans, whether you talk about Iraq or you talk about Afghanistan. Ambassador Saab, the question is now, it seems that the divisions are very clear. The Americans, along with the British and the Australians, they plan to develop these 8 nuclear submarines. When I say nuclear, again, you exactly mean that nuclear, nuclear fuel. But it's a $50 billion worth of cancellation of deals with the Australians regarding the French submarines, $50 billion. And then again, the kind of reaction the French have shown. Do you think, sir, the future of NATO, now there is a lot of hue and cry about that also, and a lot of questions would be raised. Let's start off from there, Ambassador Saab.
Thank you. First of all, there have been a lot of questions about NATO ever since the end of the Cold War. After the end of the Cold War, there was this question, what is the role of NATO now? But NATO has survived, as we have seen, and in some ways, it even became more active. But this particular issue, AUKUS, I see it in a very interesting perspective. First of all, we have to remember that the European Union, for a long time, has been thinking of defense initiatives of their own. There have been different names, ESDP, European Strategic Defense Program, ESDI, and subsequently with a lot of different names. But none of them has really crystallized or coalesced into a vibrant program, a robust program, which could in any way rival NATO, so to speak. So the Euro-Atlantic Alliance has stood the test of time in that way. Now what we see is a very interesting situation. The US sees China as an adversary, and a lot of analysts would say that they want some sort of a new containment, like they had the containment of the Soviet Union at a particular juncture of history. On the other hand, European perspective on China is more nuanced. They see China as an emerging superpower and in some ways, an emerging military threat as well. But at the same time, they see the possibilities of partnership. I mean, China is the biggest trade partners of many European countries, even the US as well. So the Europeans are always more pragmatic. They're always less focused on security issues than the US, because they have a more nuanced perspective always. And that is why we see, for example, Italy. Italy had joined the Road and Belt Initiative of China, the BRI. Many other European countries did as well. So first of all, the perspective is different. The perspective in terms of the US perspective and the European perspective. Now let's see what is happening in the Indo-Pacific itself. First, we had the Quad. A Quad involved, of course, other than the US and UK, it also involved Japan and India. So it's not really a white man's club, so to speak. But even AUKUS, you cannot call it a white man's club, because if it was a white man's club, then it could have very easily included some Germans or some French. And European Union is mostly a white man's club as well. So it's not really that. Now, if you call it an Anglophile club, the club of the English-speaking countries, or the Anglo-Saxon club,
Yeah.
I don't think even that would be a proper definition, because we have seen historically that the relations between, of course, Europe and the US have been close, but UK-US have been always closer. And similarly, relations between US and Australia or Canada, these countries have been closer than generally Europe and the US. But I can tell you something very interesting here as well. The ire of Europeans that you see, okay, there you see all those statements, in the statement by Joseph Borrell as well, the EU High Representative on Foreign Policy. But the strongest statements that you've seen are coming from France. And why is that? Because of the economic impact of this deal. There's a talk about, some places you see 8, but there are other places which say 12 submarines. I think the figure that I've seen most often is $65 or $66 billion. So that's a huge figure. And for French industry, military technology is very important. So I think that really cuts at really cuts at where it hurts, and especially close to an election. For the French president, it becomes particularly more important getting so close to an election, because the loss of jobs and the fact that that he has not been able to defend his companies, and in this case this is a state-owned company, we should recall. So that, I think, and that is why you see the recall of the ambassador, which has never happened. The recall of French ambassador for consultations, of course, but that is the normal lingua diplomatica you use in these situations. And they say that it had never happened before. But where do we go from here? Let's say, what are the options for the European Union? In my view, there could be 3 possible scenarios. First of all,
those are?
First of all, EU could make a lot of noise, right? A lot of you'd see a lot of media flashes and a lot of these hyperbolas. But in actual term, not much action, and still trudge along the same path. And there are things which have happened in the past as well, similar to that, not to the same degree. Now, the second possibility is that the European Union actually coalesces this time and comes up with a practical, what they call the strategic autonomy in terms of a military capability. Now, that would not be easy to happen because it's such a big club, 26 countries, and everybody has a veto power. Now, the third scenario could also be that this would push EU slightly closer to China, because then they say, okay, if we can't trust the US, then why should we compete with the Chinese in that way that the Americans want, right? Why don't we take some sort of a middle path, So these are the 3 scenarios. In the coming days, we will see, how it pans out. But in my view, the first scenario is perhaps the more plausible scenario, because we have seen many events in the past, not probably as inviting such vociferous language, but in terms of similar impact, where the Europeans were upset with them. During Trump years, for example, on so many issues, the Europeans were upset with the Americans. But what did they actually do? There was a lot of talk of a strategic autonomy then as well. But what did they actually accomplish? In the end, they just trudged along the Euro-Atlantic path and waited for things to change. So in my view, that might be the most plausible scenario for the short and medium term, at least.
All right. Now, the very important points raised here, sir. The tilt of the Europeans towards the Chinese, just in case if they find, I won't use the word abandoned, but left aside, let's put it this way. Secondly, they also believe that they'll start thinking about their strategic autonomy. I think that is also very important, because this was again a very important debate when Trump took charge, if you remember, sir, when the NATO was set aside that, okay, if you do this, despite the fact that I remember Greece was in dire straits, as far as economy is concerned, and a lot of European countries were pulling in and injecting a lot of money, but still they were told that 2.5% of your GDP should be spent, buy more F-16s or buy Rafales from the French. Correct, sir? Now, the point which I want to make here, and I want your comment on that, is that, sir, even the UN Secretary General has mentioned that the Americans and the Chinese should stay away from this Cold War. But now, sir, it seems that once the Americans have lost interest, or they do not have that kind of an interest in the Middle East and even in Afghanistan, the total shift is in the South China Sea, sir. And perhaps that is the reason for BRI or otherwise, the western side of the China opening up to the rest of the world. Where will it lead, sir? Because this is going to be the real bone of contention when you have, when I say you means the Chinese will have Japanese as an adversary, Indians as an adversary, South Koreans, Vietnam, because there is a claim on the sea also by these smaller countries, and then the concept of these artificial islands that the Chinese have made, and they have deployed their forces there as well. That seems to be the triggering factor for the Third World War. A lot of people have written about that also. So, your take.
Faisal Saab, first of all, the Chinese do not want war. They do not want war with anyone. Lately, Biden and Xi Jinping have talked to each other to decrease tensions. And you might also recall that General Milei, the Chairman Joint Chief of Staff's Committee, had spoken to his Chinese counterpart, General Li, in the troubling times of Donald Trump, and told him not to worry, democracy can be sloppy, but we are not going to attack you, or we are not going to go to war. There will be no inadvertent pressing of the nuclear button.
Correct.
So neither America wants a war with China. They want healthy competition. China does not want any war with anybody, not even with the Indians. Why should they want war? They want economic connectivity through their Belt Road Initiative and other things. The Europeans do not want war. When they created the EU, the thinking was that they are going to come up to the United States of America. They found that they could not. They toyed with the ideas of European brigades. They could not match the American military might. They still have the American nuclear cover inside Germany, inside Turkey, and other places within Europe. So if they are going to come out of NATO, they are going to lose the nuclear cover. I don't think they'll be in a great hurry to do that. And although Trump
do they have an actual threat by the Russians? No, sir, I don't think so.
They have some threat from the Russians because of Ukraine, but they are indulging in some kind of economic activity with Russia. They want the Russian gas to come to Germany.
I'll just give you one example. Story of yesterday. There was this gay parade in Ukraine, correct, sir? And it was covered massively, shown in almost all the European channels and CNN and the Western channels. You know why? I was thinking because this is one thing which Putin hates. You know, whatsoever he thinks that's his prerogative. I mean, he's one of the, I think, wisest presidents, I would call him. But since he has disapproved of it, the Ukrainians and the West wants to show them their side. Don't you think the Westerners are putting their foot on the tail of the Chinese and the Russians at the same time, sir, through various means? Because openly, the Americans have admitted these two countries as adversaries, sir.
You're right, but the Europeans are not going to fight with anyone because they will be trampled by two giants, you see, two elephants in the room.
And they have seen enough in World War I and World War II, I think.
They have seen enough. Germany was totally destroyed, and so was France. And
so was Italy?
Yeah, absolutely. Europeans are not going to pick up a fight with anybody. They have their problems with Russia. They have been talking about this poisoning of Navalny. Navalny, you know, is the major opponent, political opponent to Putin, and the Russian elections have just started. So he was given hospital cover also in Germany, but Germany cannot stand up to Russia. Russia is a big country. So they will keep a certain threshold of animosity, but they will get their gas from Russia. They are heavily dependent on gas from Russia, and they're not going to annoy Russians to an extent that they put a stop to the gas supplies to Germany. They will not do it. Germans have their own problems. They are not sufficient in materials like which can raw materials. And now they are also giving up on coal because they want
Clean energy. And that's why they are looking forward towards the Americans.
Americans and also to Russians. They are heavily dependent on Russian gas. So they do not want to annoy the Russians. They keep talking about Navalny, but they will not increase their threshold to a notch up, further up. So Europeans are going to play their own game. They will, America, United States of America is still a huge military might, and it will take years for them to come down as a military might. And the Americans also know that they are not going to fight the Chinese. They can fight small countries like Afghanistan, like Iraq,
where they want to bring in democracy.
where they want to bring in democracy or show the world.
Yeah.
So yes, the Europeans are annoyed by the way the Americans ditched them in Afghanistan, but they don't have the courage or the might to come up to the Americans. They are not going to create any problems in the NATO headquarters.
What's the reaction from the French? How do you see that?
Sorry?
Reaction from the French on this AUKUS?
The French are also very clever people. They have withdrawn their ambassador. Biden says he wants to talk to Macron now. He wants to placate him. He also understands that French is
that's a bargain as far as the negotiations are concerned.
So $50 billion the French have lost, but this is not the first time that the French have lost a defense deal. The Indians have also ditched them a number of times. So French are intelligent people. They will have another strategy. Perhaps they will ask Pakistan to buy the submarine. I don't know, because Augusta is also, after all, French.
Mirage is, Elbit helicopters, a lot of dependence.
You know, because of your Air Force background. So the French have a very good military industry, and they have buyers all over the world, and they can sell their submarines elsewhere. They always have plan Bs. It's not just that they have lost a deal with Australia. I'm sure they have.
That's not the end of the world for them.
That's not the end of the world for them. They will find more buyers, and don't be surprised if they approach Pakistan to buy some of their submarines.
So now coming to you, ma'am, another important factor, and obviously we talk about the security of the entire globe. Nobody wants a war. War is not a solution to any issue. War itself is a problem, I would say. Now the point is that China is embarking on huge military spends in history. That's what the UK said. The Pact will preserve security around the world. Boris Johnson. So preserve security around the world. China was never a threat. China was never a hostile nation. China has never brought in democracy in any country. It has never invaded as such. If you look at the past, the involvement of the Americans have been everywhere, starting from Tunisia all the way to Afghanistan, you name it, and they're there. Now it seems that the overall equation is changing. It's less dependent on the military might, more dependent on the economic might. That's where China comes in. Ma'am, now your point on the current standing where these two countries are sort of in a direct conflict as far as economy is concerned. The trade war, the negotiations, I mean, this has been there not in this government, even in the previous one as well, when Mr. Trump was in power. How do you see these two countries moving ahead? Because ma'am, a lot depends now on the kind of bonding these two countries should show. Maybe a couple of pacts or something of that sort. But bringing in more military, having these submarines, and obviously if they are concerning the Chinese, that is not the solution, or is it?
No, I would say, first of all, I want to emphasize that objectively, Russia and China do not represent a threat. I mean, if you look at the policy of Putin, he has made so many offers to the West, including to Germany, when he spoke in the German parliament in German. He has offered many cooperation agreements, to have a Eurasia from Lisbon to Vladivostok, and many such proposals. The Chinese have made the Silk Road is not a threat. I fundamentally reject the idea that the new Silk Road is an effort to take over the place of the United States as an imperial power. I mean, China, as you say, has a history of friendly relations. They have done an incredible civilizational contribution by lifting 850 million of their own people out of poverty. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, they are now offering developing countries for the first time a way how they can overcome poverty and underdevelopment. So I think we have to take a step back, including in the United States. And rather than going on a geopolitical confrontation, which can only lead to a catastrophe. I mean, in the recent period, there were so many warnings about the danger of a nuclear war, or you had Global Times having several articles. If it comes to a war between the United States and China, either over Taiwan or South China Sea, they say very confidently China will win. And Daniel Ellsberg, of the Watergate fame, made an appeal recently where he said, he calls a whistleblower from the Pentagon to speak up about the internal discussion about the use of nuclear weapons. And, there is a lot of concern that if this confrontation continues, you may have war by accident or by miscalculation, and I think it's a historic moment where we absolutely have to stop geopolitics. And I think the situation in Afghanistan, which is now a real hell because the 90% of the population in Afghanistan are hungry, as was said by David Beasley from the World Food Programme. And as the health minister, Dr. Majro, the present health minister in Afghanistan, said more than 90% of the people have no access to medical supply, and the fourth wave of COVID is coming. So I think that what needs to be done is what Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, said: the extended troika, that is Russia, the United States, China, and Pakistan, they should join hands and develop Afghanistan. Immediate humanitarian help. This is a gigantic job to save the lives of 38 million people who are in danger. But then beyond that, the integration of Afghanistan into the Belt and Road Initiative, and then extend the offer to the Europeans and to the United States to cooperate. I have made the proposal to appoint Pino Alaki, who is the former deputy UN General Secretary, and he was in charge of the anti-drug program before the war started. And he had an agreement with the Taliban in 2000 that they agreed to completely abandon the opium production. And that is also a very common concern of everybody, because we should concentrate on we should declare terrorism and the dope, the drug production, as the enemy and not the nations. I think we are at a moment where we must make this step to a new paradigm, and then it will be of benefit for the whole world. And even the military-industrial complex, they can produce something else. The world is in such a need for, tractors, for railway, for roads, for infrastructure. 2 billion people of the world have no access to clean water. I have proposed that the only answer to the pandemic can be a world health system. That means that we need a modern health system in every single country. And I think it's dawning now on some people that we will not be able to conquer the pandemic if any one country is left behind, because then the danger is of a mutation, and then eventually the vaccines will not be efficient, even in the countries who have been hoarding vaccines because they are rich. So I think that this present crisis must be the beginning of a completely new thinking, starting with the building of modern health systems in Afghanistan. I think this is an urgent need, and if the world community could unite on this humanitarian task, it could be the stepping stone. And I have argued that if we get the extended troika, or even, with the collaboration of the Europeans, who after all have an interest also not to have a refugee wave coming from Afghanistan, if they would all join hands and start to overcome geopolitics in Afghanistan, this could be the building block to overcome geopolitics at large. I don't think the human species is designed to end up in a nuclear annihilation war. I think we are the only species endowed with creative reason, and we should concentrate on the common aims of mankind, such as, fighting to find cures for this pandemic, fighting to overcome poverty for every single human being on this planet, uh, colonizing the Mars, which we had a beautiful development in February, where three nations,
All right.
United Arab Emirates, China, and the United States, had all Mars missions in 1 month. And that is the future. We should grow up and stop this squabbling as if we would be little children kicking each other's knee, and we should become the adult species, and solve the problems which are worthy of the dignity of mankind, and then we will find a solution.
Well, that's an ideal situation. That if everything stays constant and this is the way we, this should be the rather direction to move into, and eventually everything is going to be hunky dory. But reality is always different. Now, coming to you, Ambassador Saab, one important factor. I still fail to understand that is this a unipolar world, a bipolar world, or a multipolar world? So, because it seems that everybody is looking forward for that number one spot. Nobody is interested in being number two or number three, just like a podium or something of that sort. Now the point is, sir, that the Chinese, they have shown their own concern. The Americans, they have realized what they need to do, but they still believe that whatever they have done, that is not going to be supported anymore by the Western world, and there's going to be a lot of problems in the future. Yes, they did invade Afghanistan 20 years ago, but 20 years after, things are different. And I think Afghan invasion will be remembered because that has given a lot of jerk to their number one position. And a lot of people say that Americans, they are no more the most powerful country in the world. Perhaps it's their adversaries. It could be Russia in the future. It could be China. Now, looking at the Chinese concept, looking at the Chinese model of of ruling and seeking into other countries, whether through BRI or otherwise, through investments, and they have got multiple options, being a member of the BRIC and so on and so forth. If we are still a multipolar world, sir, the probability seems pretty high that China is going to take over. If it is still a unipolar world, I think the Americans still are having a huge challenge from that side, sir, because looking at the current scenario, it seems that the Chinese and the Russians are no more the adversaries. They did have issues previously on certain islands and so on and so forth. Even the Chinese had issues with the Japanese had issues with the Russians. But now, sir, the current equation seems to be pretty interesting. And in this given scenario, say by the end of 2040 or something, another 20 years from now, things would be different. Technology is going to be very different. The global overall scenario, it's going to be unbelievable, I would say. Your take, sir. How do you see that?
See, I think you've drawn a very interesting preamble to that. Well, we had a bipolar world until 1989, so to speak. And then, of course, people called it a unipolar world for some time. But if we just move away from the semantics, what do we see? We see a world of alliances and counter-alliances in some ways. Like, for instance, we talked about Indo-Pacific, and we had the Quad, where we had the US and India and Australia and Japan. But now with AUKUS, the UK has been brought into this equation as well, which is quite interesting. And the Europeans, the EU, the European Union, so to speak, they are upset, partly because, like, France felt that they also have 8,000 soldiers in Indo-Pacific. They have 1.5 million citizens there, and they have huge investments there as well. So they have a stake. But what is happening is, what you see is one superpower. Some people see it as a slightly declining superpower, because in any case, the US control of world economy and the US military power in relation to other powers of the world has to decline because it was too overwhelming after the Second World War or subsequently. Then we have a new power, China, which is an ascending power. And history tells tells you that whenever there is a transitional phase, it is always filled with frictions. And what happens then? Like the so-called declining power or the status quoist power, whatever you might call it, and the emerging power, they try to get into different alliances so to strengthen their side, because it's a competition. And we see that very much. But from the US part, what we see is, like many analysts would call it, some sort of a containment strategy. But that containment strategy is basically a strategy to ensure that the US stays the dominant power in the world for some time to come. In fact, they've said that in their statements. It's not really a secret in any way. On the other hand, Chinese, their focus is on the economic. In fact, it's very interesting if we delve deep in the history. There has never been any era where China, although China was a huge military power for most part of modern history, or even sort of for the last 2,000 years, and there's one of the two biggest economic powers for a big part of the last 2,000 years. But it was never a conquering power. It was never an expanding empire, unlike many other empires. So that culture is rooted in history. But I think on the Western side, there are many who feel that as China's economic might grows, the military might would grow as well, and their influence would grow. And as the influence grows, that would restrict their influence in terms. So they see it as some sort of a zero-sum game. There are other countries who don't see it as a zero-sum game. For instance, when we talk about AUKUS, it was very interesting for me to see what was the reaction of the countries of the region, Southeast Asia. It was more or less ambivalent. It was not really like they were not sort of very vocal as there's some EU countries against it, or they didn't support it. So it's all very interesting. But I would say, so to sum it up, I would say, I think it's a phase of history which is going to be a long drawn phase, and we will see this emerge. This
Sir,
competition.
I'm so sorry to cut you, Excellency, here, since we are totally running out of time. But thank you so much for your comments, for your contribution in the show, sir. And I would also like to thank Ms. Helga Zepp. Larouche, thank you so much for your time and for your comments also. It was a pleasure having you in the show. It's always great to have you in the program, sir. Such a pleasure. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.